Listen-only mode.
Hi, welcome to our Secrets of Natural Healing that I wish everyone should know, which is actually also the Fundamentals of Natural Healing class, the first lesson from this class. I actually taught this first lesson last night to the students who have paid for the class, and I was originally thinking this was an hour and a half class. It went an hour and 45 minutes because I spent so much time elaborating on it. I won't be able to do that tonight because I'm going to do it twice, so it's going to be a little more abbreviated than what I talked about in last night's webinar. But this material is really, really important to understanding natural healing, and that's why I decided I wanted to share it with you, because it's foundational concepts that are extremely critical in my experience to really understanding how the body gets sick and how it heals. And I have often commented to people that, a lot of people they want to know how to deal with cancer, they want to know how to deal with heart disease, they want to know how to deal with diabetes, they want to know how to deal with all these really, really serious illnesses. And they don't even know how to take the pain out of a minor injury, or how to get rid of a sore throat or an earache. And to me, if you don't even know how to get rid of a sore throat or earache or take the pain out of a minor injury, how can you expect to do something with an illness that's much more complex and much more difficult to work with? And so that's why I think these concepts are extremely important, because it's in learning how to do some of these simple things that you actually start to really understand what natural healing is all about. Years ago, I learned that there were basically two approaches that people take in working with natural healing. The first one is the one that I actually started with. It's the historical uses approach. And basically what the historical uses approach is that you buy this book, and there's lots of them out there, like the Prescription for Nutritional Healing and a bunch of different herb books. I had Back to Eden by Jethro Kloss and Herbal Yours, and they list a whole bunch of diseases, and then they list natural treatments people have used for them. And there's a lot of references out there like that. So basically this involves, naming a disease, which is naming a picture of symptoms that are occurring in the body, and then prescribing a treatment for that. Now, when I first started dabbling in that, sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't work. I didn't really get very consistent results with that. And it wasn't until I was introduced to the systematic approach that I started to actually understand what healing was really all about and started to get much better and more consistent results. Because, you see, the systematic approach is not actually based on disease at all. I mean, gosh, I have been in this pretty much full-time for 30 years. And people still ask me about disease conditions I have never heard of before, and I have to go do some research and try to figure out what this condition is and what's going on with this condition. But if a person actually comes to me in person and sits down in front of me, I can often help them get their health back, even if I've never heard of the illness that they have. And the reason is because I'm not actually looking at the illness. I'm actually looking at the person in front of me. And what I've done is I've spent my career studying health more than I've spent my career studying disease. What I mean by that is I've tried to understand, what is a healthy person like? How does a healthy person eat? How does a healthy person live? What kind of sleep does a healthy person get? How does a healthy person, their mental attitudes, their emotional state, etc. And then by studying health and what creates health, then when I'm sitting down and talking to someone, I can look at how they're deviating from the picture of health. And then I can guide them towards a lifestyle or towards remedies or things that actually move that person back towards the normal state of health. Because the state of health is the normal state of our body. And when we are focused on disease, we don't actually get as good a results as when we're focusing on health. Now, part of the reason that this systematic approach was important to me is because before I started learning this, I really didn't know what the remedy I was giving was supposed to do. It just said, here, take this slippery elm for this problem. Okay, what does slippery elm doing for that problem? How can I tell if it's working? How do I tell if I'm giving enough slippery elm, or if I'm giving it often enough, or if it's having the desired effect, if I don't know what the remedy is supposed to do to the person? As I learned how to understand what the remedies are supposed to be doing, then I could tell if the remedy was working but not working strong enough, and I could increase the dose or increase the frequency of the dose or whatever, or I could tell that the remedy wasn't really having the desired effect at all and try something different. It's really important to understand what the remedies are doing and what's going on in the body, so that you understand what it is you're trying to achieve when you're applying a particular therapy and remedy. And this is where most of the books that I've had really are seriously lacking, is they really aren't explaining the why behind the protocol, or what the person needs to look for. So what really helped me understand health and disease was when I actually started to understand the picture of health and disease at the cell level. And I started understanding this information in 1982, 1983, when I went to work for Dr. C. Samuel West at the International Academy of Lymphology. And that's when I really started to understand about the state of health, and about how treating disease and trying to create health weren't the same goal. Many people think they're the same goal, but they're not, because when you're treating disease, the problem is you're typically looking at a symptom like high blood pressure and saying, how do I bring that down? Or high cholesterol, how do I bring that down? Well, the question is it advisable to bring it down? I mean, what is going on in the body? What is happening? Why are you wanting to do this thing? I mean, that's really part of the understanding. So I found that understanding what's going on in the cells and the body systems and how they work was the key to really understanding healing and what takes place in healing. So if we look at cells, I mean, our body is made up of trillions of cells. Every living thing is made up of cells. Cells are the basic unit of life. And basically, the theory of evolution says that all life originated in the ocean. Now, whether you believe in evolution or creation or whatever, the fact is that cells basically tend to live in a fluid medium. And in our body, the fluid medium the cell's in is actually very much like ocean water. I mean, basically, the animals that live on land basically carry an internal ocean, or an internal sea inside their body for the cells to live in, so they don't actually have to live in the salt water. And that fluid medium, the composition of that fluid medium, is absolutely critical to the health of the cells growing in it. So there are several things that, at least in human cells and animal cells, that have to be present in that fluid in order for those cells to live. Now, since we are creatures that run on an aerobic metabolism, meaning we use oxygen to burn the food we eat to create energy, one of the things that has to be present in that fluid is dissolved oxygen, so that the cells can take up that oxygen and use it to combust or burn the nutrients. And then, of course, the nutrients have to be there. There have to be certain, vitamins, minerals, other compounds, amino acids, fatty acids, etc., that are present in the fluid medium for the cell to be able to absorb, both to create energy and to build various structures that the cells need. Now, another thing that has to happen is the waste in that fluid medium has to be filtered out somehow, because if cells are just sitting in that fluid, they basically absorb the oxygen nutrients, they burn or combust them, and then they put off metabolic byproducts or waste. And that waste has to be flushed away or filtered away, because if it isn't, then the cell can actually suffocate in its own waste. Dr. Alexis Carrel, a Nobel Prize-winning medical research scientist who wrote a book called Man the Unknown that I read many years ago, was the person who formed the first kidney transplant. And That's back when they were experimenting with kidney dialysis, learning to filter the toxins out of the blood when kidneys were failing. And they basically took a piece of embryonic chicken heart tissue. This is a very famous experiment, and they cultivated it in a flask. And they claim that the various accounts I've read say that it lived for like 34 years before they ended the experiment, or someone accidentally ended the experiment. I've heard various versions of it. But basically, in his book, Man the Unknown, he talks about after a certain period of time, this was written before the experiment was concluded, that these tissues showed no signs of aging, that they were, in fact, he claimed, immortal. In fact, they never died, they just ended the experiment. And what they did to keep this tissue alive was they basically oxygenated the water. They used a nutritive medium that had all of the nutrients needed. I have heard from some sources that what they actually used was egg yolk, which was designed, to feed an embryonic chicken. And then they basically filtered out the wastes. And then they also kept it as a regulated temperature. Now, at the most recent American Herbalist Guild conference, Matthew Wood actually gave a talk on the importance of this thermoregulatory system, that he called it, that maintains an even body temperature, and how he actually considers that, from the study he has, as being the first line of immune defense in terms of the body being able to protect itself and maintain internal health. So these four things are what cells need. And when these conditions are met around the cells, there's a medical term for this. It's called homeostasis. Homeostasis is the state of health. So any departure from homeostasis is a departure from health. And all disease is a departure from homeostasis, meaning that somewhere in that fluid medium surrounding the cells, there's either a lack of oxygen, or a lack of critical nutrients, or a lack of waste removal, or the temperature is off. And that's it. Okay, so basically, as long as the cells have got these things in the fluid medium, they're going to be healthy. It's when these things are somehow lost, deprived, and the body gets out of balance that disease takes place. Now, this fluid around the cells, this internal ocean that we carry, has been likened to the soil in which plants grow. And in organic agriculture, they look to the health of the soil with the idea that if you have healthy soil, you will have healthy plants. That it's not like treating the plant, it's actually creating the soil or the environment in which the plants can grow and be healthy. And it's the same concept in natural medicine. Our job is to basically influence this internal ocean, which is sometimes called the biological terrain, and to create a state of homeostasis in the body, or a state of balance in the body. So the job becomes not to look at the disease, but look at how homeostasis is out of balance. Or is the person not getting the nutrients they need in their diet? Is the waste not being efficiently removed from their body? Are they getting enough oxygenation to their tissues? And if any of you heard the other preview I did for this class, I talked about the A, B, C plus D principles, and there they are right at the cell level. Oxygen to activate the tissues, nutrients to build them, and waste removal to cleanse them. And then, of course, this temperature regulation. So this is what this is all about. So this little diagram, I did this years ago, okay? And, it's a little cartoony, and maybe it's a little silly or whatever, but I like it, and I continue to use it, because it really illustrates this the normal process by which homeostasis is maintained at the cell level. What this represents is up here between these two lines. This represents a blood capillary, and the bloodstream is the river of life, and it's a salty fluid, just like the ocean is salty. In fact, the reason why you can't drink salt water is because it contains a very similar amount of salt to your own body fluids, so it actually doesn't work. You can't absorb it because the problem of concentration. So this fluid is basically carried in a pipe that is semi-permeable. blood vessels and blood capillaries are not like a plastic pipe that water can't go through. They're semi-permeable. Water can actually pass through that. So if there wasn't something in the bloodstream to keep the water in the bloodstream, all the water in the bloodstream would just leak out into the tissue spaces. So, so the body has to have something in the bloodstream that maintains something called osmotic pressure. For those of you who go back and remember maybe high school biology, there's an experiment where you take a carrot and you kind of drill a hole through the top of it and shove a glass or plastic tube into the hole, and then you stick the carrot in some water and you'll watch the water rise up into the tube in the center of the carrot, because the water is drawn into the carrot by osmosis, and basically as it pulls in, the water inside the tube will rise, and that's basically how plants absorb water. Well, the carrot is a semi-permeable membrane. So if you have a tank and you stick a semi-permeable membrane in it to divide it in two, and you throw some salt on one side, what will happen over time is the salty side will rise, because if the salt can't pass through the semi-permeable membrane, then as water molecules move back and forth across the membrane, the salt will latch onto some of them and hold them there and not allow them to go back across the membrane into the other solution. So the salt in our bloodstream partially does that, but what does that more is something called plasma proteins. And that's what these little kind of reddish-orange dots represent, is the plasma proteins. There are three of them: albumin, globulin, and fibrinogen. Albumin is the smallest one and the most plentiful, and it's the primary protein for maintaining osmotic pressure. Globulins are involved in immune responses, and fibrinogen is involved in the formation of blood clots along with platelets. So it forms little fiber, it helps to form little fibrous strings that, catch the platelets, and then that catches the blood vessels, and catches the red blood cells, and basically forms a clot in case the pipe basically springs a leak. Self-repairing pipes. So as the blood is pushed, as it comes down into the capillaries, it's under pressure, and some of that fluid, some of that salty fluid, leaks through the membrane out into the tissue spaces to irrigate the cells, and it carries with it dissolved oxygen and nutrients. That fluid, once it leaves the bloodstream, is called lymph. So lymph is the internal ocean fluid of your body. The lymphatic fluid is the biological terrain, or the fluid medium in which the cells are living. So the health of the lymph is basically going to determine the health of the cells. Now, in Alexis Carrel's experiment, and somebody asked me about what the name of that doctor is. His name is Alexis Carrel, and you can read about some of this stuff in his book, Man the Unknown. It's a very interesting book. He says that in order to cultivate a piece of tissue in a flask, or in other words in a test tube, you have to have 2,000 times the volume of nutritive fluid as you have tissue. So in other words, if you have 1 ounce of tissue, you have to have 2,000 ounces of water in order to keep that tissue alive. And the reason is because it will suffocate in its own wastes, because the filtration systems that they would use to keep that fluid clean weren't efficient enough to cultivate it. So let's take a 150-pound person, and we're going to cultivate them in a test tube environment, all the cells in their body in a test tube environment. Okay, we're going to need 300,000 pounds of fluid in order to be able to do that. Water is 8 gallons, 8 pounds per gallon. So you divide that out, and that's 37,500 gallons of fluid in order to maintain the tissues of the human body in a test tube environment. Okay, Well, that's a swimming pool, people. That's a huge swimming pool. So how does the body do this with a few pints of fluid? Well, it's because, as Dr. Carroll says in his book, the marvelously efficient filtration systems the body is using. And this fluid that is around the cells is exchanging at an extremely rapid rate of, I read in the textbook of medical physiology is 80 times a second, which seems unbelievable to me that it changes that fast. But what that means is at least many times a second, the fluid around the cells is being exchanged for fresh fluid, and the other fluid is being drained, which is constantly keeping the cells bathed in a very tiny amount of fresh nutritive fluid that's constantly being replenished. And then the delivery system is constantly filtering out the waste and keeping that fluid clean, as well as keeping it oxygenated, keeping a nutrient balance going on in there. Now, there's another aspect of this homeostatic mechanism that's really important to understand, and that is that there is pressure inside the bloodstream, okay? But there's no pressure in the fluid around the cells. The cells live in what's called a negative subatmospheric pressure condition, which is a fancy way of saying there's less pressure in the fluid around the cells than there is in the atmosphere. So I love to do water balloon fights on a hot summer day. It's a fun thing to do. You go get a couple of 5-gallon buckets and you fill up a bunch of water balloons, and you put the water balloons into a bucket, and you divide up into a couple of teams, and then you chuck them at each other. Now, so imagine that all those water balloons, I'm sure most of you have seen a water balloon, those are the cells. The cells have a membrane, and it's holding a fluid medium inside the cell. And that bucket represents the cells all kind of lined up together. If you just poured enough water into that bucket of water balloons to fill the cracks between the balloons, that's like the thing around the cells. There's no pressure in there. It's just fluid kind of passively filling up the space. And that's very important to understand when we get into understanding what happens that damages this system. Now, the other part of this is the lymph system. There's enough pressure in the circulatory system to push small amounts of albumin through the capillary membranes into the spaces around the cells. And that albumin, once it's in the spaces around the cells, there's no pressure to push it back through the capillary membrane and back into the bloodstream. So the body has a second circulatory system called the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system basically picks up that excess fluid around the cells and that excess albumin or protein, and basically pulls it into little tiny lymph vessels, which go into larger and larger lymph vessels that eventually carry that fluid back to the circulatory system. Now, I worked, as I said, for Dr. West at the International Academy of Lymphology in the early 80s. And the research on the lymphatics was only 20 years old at that time. In fact, very little had been, what had been done in the lymphatic system was pretty recent work. And part of the reason for it was that doctors used to think that the lymph system basically was these bigger lymph nodes and these major lymph ducts. They didn't actually know that the lymphatic system basically permeates every part of the body, and the reason is because lymphatic ducts collapse when you die. So until they developed ways of injecting these radioactive dyes and tracing things through the body of living tissue, they actually didn't understand what the lymphatic system was doing and the information about it. So this information is still only about 50 years old as to what's been developing in terms of understanding the lymph system. So the lymph system, okay, there are 3 systems that permeate the entire body, or pretty much the entire body. You have the nerves, which basically run through the whole body, regulating everything. And then you have the bloodstream, which basically runs through most parts of the body with, bringing in the oxygen and nutrients to feed the cells. And then you have the lymph system. But the lymph system is actually, as I see it, the only system that is absolutely universal in the body, because there are parts of the body that you don't have nerve endings, and there's parts of the body where blood vessels don't go, but lymph bathes every living cell in your body. In fact, if you think about the lens of your eye, which is a living tissue, that lens is fed by lymph fluid, clear, colorless lymph fluid. And there are a number of places in the body that are fed by lymph fluid flowing, through that area of the body and carrying the oxygen and nutrients with it. Now, the lymph system is a passive system. Unlike the circulatory system, it doesn't have a pump. So what it has is little one-way check valves. So every time the tissue is moved or compressed in any way, like when you're walking or breathing or anything like that that's compressing the tissues, it squeezes lymph ducts. That shoots the lymph forward. Little one-way check valves prevent it from going backwards, and the lymph passively moves through the body towards some major ducts. There's one major duct that drains most of the body, called the thoracic duct, and a smaller duct on the other side of the body that drains the other arm and half of the head. And these two major lymph ducts dump into what are called the subclavian veins. They're right at the point where you have at the base of your neck, like right above your collarbone, and that's where they empty into your circulatory system. Because the thoracic duct passes through your chest, right past your lungs, when you breathe, every time you take a deep breath, you compress the thoracic duct, and that helps to move the lymphatic system. So breathing is one of the things that helps to move the lymph through the system. So one of the other functions of the system is it has these little nodes. You can see there are little red dots in this chart. They're like behind the knees and the elbows, under your armpits. There's a lot in your neck. There's a lot in your groin area, a lot in your abdomen, and then kind of going up through the center of the trunk of your body. And these little lymph nodes are full of white blood cells that are part of what are called your adaptive immune system. And the adaptive immune system is the part that actually memorizes a specific pathogen and goes after it. And so these have these white blood cells that basically are watching for things that go through that don't look right. So basically they can trigger immune responses to clean up things. So I think of them as little sewage treatment plants that basically are taking this lymph that is draining away from the cells and basically getting rid of cellular debris and other things that are basically stuck in there. So that's your lymph system. So what happens is what damages the system is a process called inflammation. Inflammation is the body's initial response to any kind of irritation, tissue damage, or infection. So anytime cells are damaged, you get an inflammatory process basically occurring. And the inflammatory process has a critical function of sequestering that area, like a policeman coming in and taping police line do not cross to cordon off the area while the white blood cells, immune things, go in and gobble up debris and try to clean up the area. It's a protective mechanism of the body to basically, when there's been a problem, to try to cordon off that area, get the white blood cells into the area to clean up any infection or damaged cellular debris, and so forth. So this is a picture I got from Wikipedia of somebody who got frostbite on their toes, and you see the swelling of the inflammation, okay? And it's called inflammation because of the redness and heat that comes off of it when these are damaged. So this is a picture of what happens when this system breaks down. If you go back to that analogy of the bucket of water balloons, and I take and I stick a needle or a knife or something down into the bucket, I'm going to puncture cell membranes. And when I rupture those cell membranes, the contents of those cells come spilling out into the surrounding environment. And within the content of those cells are a couple of chemicals that act as chemical messengers to trigger an inflammatory cascade. And these two chemicals are histamine and bradykinin. You've all heard of histamine because of the idea of antihistamines. And then bradykinin actually is involved in things like colds and mucus drainage and so forth. But what these do is they create a dilation, a localized dilation of capillary pores. And that dilation of capillary pores allows large amounts of fluid and protein to come rushing into the tissue spaces, basically filling up those tissue spaces with fluid and creating pressure in between the cells. This essentially creates kind of a little stagnant pond, which creates the sequestering effect of this immune response, but it also slows down oxygen and nutrient exchange and the removal of wastes at this site. But it also triggers a reaction where white blood cells basically leave the circulatory system at that site, enter the tissue spaces to try to clean this up. It's like setting up a flag saying, hey, we need help over here, and flagging down the highway patrol, running down the road to stop and render assistance. So there are 4 classic symptoms of inflammation, and they are heat, swelling, redness, and pain. This is a picture I also got off of Wikipedia of someone with dermatitis. And itis is Latin for inflammation. So basically the word itis simply means heat, swelling, redness, and pain. That is actually the original definition of itis. So when you have an itis, you have in the tissues heat, swelling, redness, and pain. So the way they named these diseases is they took the name of the part of the body in Latin and then stuck itis after it, or some other term designating the condition of the tissue. So in other words, derma is Latin for skin. Dermatitis is basically an inflammation of the skin, i.e. heat, swelling, redness, and pain in the skin. So when you say arthritis, you're talking about swelling, heat, redness, and pain in a joint. When you talk about bronchitis, it's in the bronchioles. In the appendicitis, it's in the appendix. Laryngitis, it's in the larynx. Sinusitis, it's in the sinus. Tonsillitis, it's in the tonsils. Okay, you get it? One of the quotes that I love from Samuel Thompson's book was a foreword actually written by a medical doctor. He said, there could be no reason to keep the knowledge of medicine in a dead language, i.e. Latin, except to confuse and to deceive people. Because, you look and you notice that some part of your body has gotten red and it's swollen and it's hurting, and you go to the doctor and you say, look, it hurts here, it's swollen, and the doctor says, names the part of the body in Latin and adds itis in the end of it, and basically repeats back to you the symptoms in Latin. And we call that a diagnosis, and then we base our treatment on that name of the symptom, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, of course, medicine gets into more and more sophisticated names, but still it's basically the same process. The heat in the inflammatory thing is actually caused by the fact that white blood cells basically use oxygen radicals to burn up cellular debris. And all of you have heard of free radical damage or oxidative stress. Well, oxidative stress is basically oxygen damage or increased oxidative activity at a site, and basically inflammatory sites, there's an increased oxidative activity at that site. Now, when I learned this from Dr. West basically had a some wild theory that this had to do with the electrical process of the sodium-potassium pump being shut down and going to chemical heat. But over the years, as I studied this more and more, I really came to the conclusion that the primary thing going on is oxidative stress. And part of the reason why I think that's the case is because so many of the remedies that are antioxidant also happen to be anti-inflammatory, showing that these two processes are very, very closely linked together. So the swelling is caused, as we've already explained, by the dilation of the capillary pores, which allows the plasma proteins to leave the circulatory system and enter the tissue spaces in increased quantities. This dilation of capillary pores also makes it easier for white blood cells to enter the area. The redness is caused by the fact that as this takes place, certain other little chemical messengers are released that cause a dilation of the blood vessels above the site of injury and a contraction of the blood vessels below the site of injury that basically causes an increase of a buildup of blood in the area, which, of course, with the red blood cells creates redness. And then the pain is due to swelling putting pressure on the nerves and different little chemical messengers being activated that basically send a message back up to the brain and say, something's wrong here. There's been damage done to the body at this site. We need help, sort of like the 911 call. Pain, I call pain the body's 911 call. Something is wrong, okay? We need help. And then I like to say, you know, what people do to do that is they take painkillers. Let's just cut the phone lines and say, ha, we can't hear you anymore. That's fine. You're on your own. But anyway, there's also a thing that, and this is something Dr. West taught, and it appears to be true. I mean, just based on empirical evidence that most of the time if there's pain, it means that there's also a lack of oxygen in the tissues. In other words, the cells aren't getting the oxygen they need or the nutrients they need, but this inflammatory process basically sets all this up. So as I mentioned, the name is not really the critical part of this. It's understanding what is going on and what caused it. This is one of my quotes from Samuel Thompson. It is evidently immaterial what is the name or color of the disease. In the knowledge of the origin of malady and its antidote lie the weightier matters of this science, and all without it is real quackery. Now, Dr. West, when I worked with him at the International Academy of Pathology, he claimed that he called this thing, he didn't call it inflammation. He called it trapped blood proteins, and he claimed that trapped blood proteins were the cause of disease and death at the cell level and basically were responsible for all illness. Now, I think Dr. West was a little ahead of his time in terms of recognizing the significance of this, because in recent years there's been a lot of books published about inflammation as being the root cause, inflammation/oxidative stress, which I've kind of tried to show you that there's kind of a link between these two things, that this inflammation/oxidative stress is basically an underlying cause of nearly all, as far as we know, chronic and degenerative diseases. It's actually the trigger that sets off heart disease. It sets off premature aging, wrinkles, stuff like that. It triggers cancer, allergies, autoimmune disorders, dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, neuropathies, etc. In fact, you start to understand that inflammation is sort of like the mother of all diseases, since basically the inflammatory process is the initial response of all tissue to damage. And so in order for a part of the body to become sick, it has to be damaged, and when it becomes damaged, it becomes inflamed, and so basically inflammation is the first process of all disease. It's the initiation of all disease at the cell level. So this is why learning to control and deal with how to deal effectively with inflammatory responses and help those tissues heal and return to normal becomes kind of a foundational concept of what we need to do with healing. So in the initial phase of inflammation is basically always a result of tissue damage. It can be a result of bacterial or microbial toxins. Now, understand that when you get bacteria, you have bacteria in your body, on your skin, blah, 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 all the time. Okay, the reason why botulism and certain other bacteria are so bad for the body is because as they are growing in an area, they give off microbial endotoxins, basically things that are poison that cause inflammatory reactions in the tissues that basically spread the inflammation and then therefore spread kind of this damaged area that becomes a breeding ground for the microbes. So it's those toxins released by those microbes that are actually what cause the disease or the tissue damage, not the actual bacteria themselves. Of course, heat or radiation or cold, tissues being frozen or burned or bombarded with radiation, a trauma like a cut, a scrape, a bump, or an abrasion, an allergic reaction will cause an inflammatory response. All kinds of toxins, poisons, chemical irritants, or even the body's own waste material can basically initiate a tissue damage and inflammation. Mechanical stress, and I might also mention that in my experience, tissue damage can also be actually initiated by stress, by unresolved mental and emotional stress. So as an example, last year I actually developed a frozen shoulder. Now, I had someone, a chiropractor, did some adjustment on my shoulder and kind of bent a little funny, and it got a little bit inflamed. But this also happened at a time when I was under a lot of emotional stress. And basically over the next course of a couple of weeks, I lost some, my shoulder started to hurt, and I lost some range of motion in my shoulder. And I went to my chiropractor, and they worked with it. I went to massage therapists, they worked with it. I tried a few things on it topically and worked with it. And I wasn't really getting very good results with it, with doing anything with it. So finally, after several months, I decided I ought to go get a medical diagnosis, find out what was going on, and found out it was frozen shoulder. The doctor sent me to a physical therapist to actually explain to me what it was. The actual name, the official name for this disease is adhesive encapsulitis. Now, the encapsule is basically the ligaments that join the bone to the bone in the shoulder joint, and they completely circle that joint, so they make a capsule, like a little ball. And encapsulitis, so what happened is they got a little damaged. That made them inflamed, but they tend to, when they get inflamed, they tend to shrink. And when they shrink, you lose range of motion because you can't stretch those ligaments and the joint can't move properly. So the physical therapist wanted me to just do these exercises to gradually and gently try to stretch those ligaments so that they would go. Well, I happened week or two later to be talking to one of my herbal friends, and she mentioned that, okay, there's the inflammation there, which is obvious, and she had found that the herb St. John's wort was very good at relieving the inflammation in those ligaments. Plus, there's something about St. John's wort, because she mentioned that everybody who she'd ever seen who had this condition also was feeling extremely burdened, like they couldn't shoulder their responsibilities anymore. So essentially, I took St. John's wort, and in 2 or 3 weeks, I basically had all my range of motion back into the shoulder. But there was an emotional thing going on there as well as a physical thing, and the herb happened to be good at treating both. But that's basically understanding, that once you know what's going on, then you can start to formulate a strategy of what you need to do to treat it. I mean, basically, those ligaments needed to relax, as well as the inflammation needed to come down, and the stress that was contributing to that also needed to be alleviated. So here's a summary of the inflammatory process. Basically, you have tissue damage, which causes the release of histamine, which is followed by the release of bradykinin, serotonin, and other chemical mediators that dilate capillary pores and initiate inflammation. The cosinoids are released to open blood vessels so that the white blood cells can get to the damaged areas. The cosinoids, which are these little chemical messengers, by the way, that are made from essential fatty acids, okay? A certain branch of these called leukotrienes increase the permeability of blood vessels, which creates more swelling. Histamine and leukotrienes cause bronchial constriction when this happens in the lungs, and increase mucus production to flush irritants from the mucous membranes. And eicosanoids also sensitize pain receptors in the nerves. So basically, this also is part of what triggers the pain. Other eicosanoids called cytokines signal the white blood cells, macrophages and neutrophils that are traveling in the bloodstream that basically trips them, pulls them into the tissue spaces to basically help with the problem. White blood cells use free radicals to destroy microbes and cellular debris, which those free radicals cause that heat or oxidative stress, but that can also damage healthy cells if you don't have enough antioxidants to protect healthy cells. So antioxidants can help to protect healthy cells from immune damage. However, if antioxidant levels are too high, immune responses are suppressed. At a certain point, when the white blood cells basically, it's like they look and go, okay, we've cleaned up the debris, things look okay. Cortisol from the adrenal glands shuts down the inflammatory process, shuts down the inflammatory eicosanoid production that mediates the immune response, and then you start getting regeneration. Other eicosanoids that are anti-inflammatory, which are primarily made from omega-3 essential fatty acids, basically step in and basically start initiating tissue repair at the site of the injury. So this all leads into the keys to pain relief without medication. One of the things that I have taught for years, and I think it's really, really a critical thing to understand, is that the body uses pain and pleasure to teach us. The body, when we're doing something that is improving the health of the body, we get pleasurable sensations in the body that tell us this is good for us. And when we're doing something that's damaging to the body, we get painful sensations that tell us don't do that again. So you know not to touch hot stoves because at some point you touched something that was hot and you got burned and the pain told you don't do that again. You know, and you smash your finger with a hammer and you try to be more careful with a hammer next time because you know how much that hurts. We can kill pain. We can give remedies that help counteract inflammation and basically stimulate tissue repair. But if we kill pain and we try to stimulate tissue repair without identifying what caused the damage in the first place, we risk the damage continuing and the remedy won't work, at least not in the long run. So you go a lot of times, this is one of my major complaints with modern medicine. It's not that modern medicine doesn't do wonderful, wonderful things. It's just that so often the question never gets asked, why? What caused this? It's sort of assumed like, oh, it's just genetics. It's just stuff that, basically happens to people. But I don't buy that. To me, this process suggests that something had to happen, that whether it was a mental emotional stress or whether it was a deficiency of nutrients or whether it was toxin or whether it was tissue damage or something that created this inflammatory response. And if the inflammatory response is coming because I hit my thumb with a hammer, all the painkillers in the world and all of the anti-inflammatories in the world are never going to stop the inflammation of my thumb if I keep hitting it with a hammer. And most people, what they want, this is the problem of natural healing, and the problem that I run into continually is most people want to tell me the symptom that the thumb is inflamed, or basically give me some of their disease and say, how do I cure it? Well, yes, I can give remedies that can help those tissues repair themselves, but if I don't know what caused the damage in the first place, which means I can't talk to the person about their diet, their lifestyle, their mental and emotional attitudes, then it likely is not going to have any lasting effect because the damage is going to continue to be done and the problem is going to persist because what is irritating and damaging the tissues isn't being dealt with. So you have to pay attention. You have to, most of us are taught not to pay attention to our bodies, not to notice, that when foods or things we do give us minor aches and pains, we just take painkillers and ignore it. I don't ignore that. I basically look, what did I do that made that happen? So this is one of my favorite quotes from Thompson: remove the cause and the effect will cease. Stop hitting your thumb with a hammer, and basically, as long as you're eating fairly good and, and fairly good shape, the pain will go away and the injury will heal itself, because the body's designed to do that. Remove the cause and the body will then has a chance to repair itself. So in our beginning of our dialogue of removing cause, tonight we're going to talk about 6 basic techniques for relieving pain without medication and reversing injury. And I won't have time to go into these in really great detail, but we'll cover them because I've got about 20 minutes left before I need to get off in preparation for some other things I've got to do this evening. But the first 3 are pressure massage and rapid light stroking. Now my younger son, Ezra, once commented to me, he said, "I cannot believe that people don't know this." He said, everybody should know this. That's why I say everybody in the world should know this. Everybody in the world should know and understand some of the things I'm about to tell you. When you smash your finger or thumb or whatever in a door, you bang yourself, you have an instinct, and that instinct is you grab it. Okay? If you follow that instinct and you grab it, but you hold on to it and apply pressure and don't let go, what you are doing is you are compressing the tissues, which prevents fluid from accumulating in the tissue spaces at the site of injury. And what the problem is if the fluid starts to accumulate at the site of injury, this is something that I actually have not been able to verify from the medical sources, but I can tell you from practical experience that this is what happens. Dr. Guyton says that when that fluid comes out, and it sits there, it's followed by a clotting of the fluids. And what that means is that when the capillary foils dilate enough, the fibrinogen moves into the tissue spaces, and it basically starts to clot. And when it clots, it holds fluid there. That's what partly creates that sequestering effect. And that holding of fluid there holds the inflammatory response for a period of time. And there's something to do with the body's energy. In other words, as the electrical fields or the electrical energy fields, the magnetic fields of the body drop at the site where the injury took place because of the lack of oxygen and nutrients reaching the cells and the whatever, that's what appears to trigger this clotting mechanism and so forth of fluids. So basically, when you're holding on to it, that can't happen. The pain will go away in somewhere between 5 to 20 minutes. This has been shown over and over again that the time frame for this to take place is between 5 to 20 minutes. Depends on how bad it is. And when the pain stops, which it will stop in 5 to 20 minutes, you can let go, and there will be no more pain, no swelling, no redness, no heat, no sign of damage, and it won't come back. You've essentially reversed the injury process and kept it from doing that. I have tons of stories. We've done this with cuts. We've done this with scrapes. We've done with bruises. Of course, applying pressure is one of the standard medical techniques for severe bleeding. Learned that in scouting. The story I have here is that the mother of my 4 kids was pulling a garage door shut that had those panels, and she actually stuck her fingers up in between the panels and pulled the garage door shut. So she basically slammed the garage door shut on all 8 fingers. Completely shut. So she basically smashed all 8 fingers in the garage door, had to shove it open, came into the house with me, and I knew I couldn't really apply pressure to both hands at once. So I basically grabbed some ice cubes, threw them in a little bowl with some water, had her stick the hand that seemed less damaged in there while I held and put pressure on the other one. Then I back and forth holding pressure and alternating between the ice water, like several minutes on one hand, then several minutes on the other hand, several minutes on one hand, several minutes on the other hand. In 30 minutes, the pain was completely gone in all fingers on both hands. She only had one slight bruising around one finger and didn't lose a single fingernail. That's how powerful this technique is. So the next one is massage. Now massage, obviously, we've already discussed the idea. The thing says I may be experiencing a temporary the decline in audio, but that shouldn't be happening on the recording, so hopefully it'll be okay. Anyway, so if you compress the tissues, when you rub the tissues, when you massage things, you're pumping lymph. And when you're pumping lymph, you're pulling this excess fluid away from the tissue spaces and helping to restore tissues that are basically have got kind of stagnant or whatever to a state of homeostasis. So massage is a really great, I've used massage on sore throats, I've used it on headaches, I've used it on pulls, muscle spasms, cramps, any kind of injury it's okay to touch the skin. And this other one is actually very closely akin to this, only it's just barely laying your hand on top of the skin and rubbing lightly back and forth. It's called the light fast stroke by Dr. West, and I call it the rapid light stroking. But basically you just rub back and forth very quickly and rapidly, and that also moves lymph. I mean, in other words, just barely touching just moves the lymph. And basically you continue to do that, and basically I've rubbed away bumps, I've rubbed away bruises. I've done this with relaxing people's shoulders, all kinds of, again, pain where it's okay to touch the skin. I mean, so this is another really powerful technique. And I use these techniques in combination, putting pressure, massaging, stroking, etc. I taught them to my kids. All my kids knew how to do these things, relieve pain on each other, so forth. And that's why, it's simple stuff. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand. To illustrate how powerful this technique is, I'll talk about that this actually works on sprained ankles. Basically, what Dr. West taught us to do was not what the Boy Scout manual taught us to do, which is, you sprain your ankle. You basically, what happens is you twist to the outside, which basically pulls the ligaments on the outside of your foot, the part away from the midline where your ankle bone is. So he says you take off your shoe, you grab your foot, you stretch it towards the midline of your body, and you start rubbing like crazy. Just rub, 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 rub. In other words, a kind of a light combination of light, fast stroke and massage. And you just keep rubbing it until the pain goes away. Take about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how badly you sprained your ankle. What Dr. West used to say was, yeah, it hurts, but it's going to hurt anyway. So basically, just do it. So I had the occasion to use this technique once when I was basically on a hike on Mount Timpanogos, which is outside of Provo, a very, very tall mountain, and it's 6 miles round trip. I think it's 6 miles round trip. It might be 6 miles up and 6 miles back, or 3 miles up, 3 miles back. It's been a long time since I did it, so I don't quite remember. But I was only less than halfway down, going down this extremely steep mountain, when I twisted my ankle. Now, I didn't twist it really bad, but I twisted it enough that I was limping a little bit, and so I basically limped just a little farther down on the trail where there was a little stream, and I got there and I took off my hiking boot, and I basically started just doing this massage on my ankle. I also keep homeopathic arnica in my first aid kit, and I popped some of that. And then I basically just kept massaging, and in about 15, 20 minutes, the pain went away. And I just kind of rested for a little bit, soaked my feet in the stream, put my hiking boots back on, and hiked at least 2 miles down the trail with no further pain, no further problem. When I was learning this from Dr. West, there was a chiropractor whose name I think was Dr. Jorgensen, and he was coaching a church basketball team, and his star player sprained his ankle in the first quarter of the game. He spent the second quarter of the game rubbing the kid's ankle. Then he wrapped it in an ace bandage, and the kid played the last half of the game. That's how powerful this is. And that's why I say everybody in the world ought to know this. And I have done this with bumps. I did this with a bump that my oldest daughter got at Girl Scout camp that I don't have time to tell the whole story in here. And one time I was like trying to rapidly get some luggage shoved in the back of my SUV to go on a trip with my son, and we were, a little behind schedule and needing to head to the airport to get to the flight. And I banged my head into the corner of the door of the SUV, walking full. I ducked too late and hit my head. Boom, just knocked me thing. I basically, held that spot, told my son to drive, sit there holding it, rubbing it, blah, blah, blah. And by the time we got to the airport, pretty much the pain was mostly gone. And it was bad. I mean, it was so bad that I actually broke the skin on my scalp. And more recently, I was actually out at Sand Hollow Reservoir and have these big lava rocks that basically on the embankments around the reservoir, and I was coming up the side and I slipped and my leg went down into one of the gaps between those rocks and banged my the front of my shin onto the rock really hard, and by the time I got out and limped up to the car, I had a goose egg that was 1.5 inches around and 1 inch high. It was huge, and it was already like getting nasty looking. And I just sat there and I basically held my hands over that and just held onto it and gradually just gently jiggled it a little bit and whatever. And by the time we got home, which is only about 15 minutes away, the swelling was almost completely gone. I rubbed away a welt on my daughter's leg when she got whacked with something, and the big red welt. She was 2 years old, and I took her in my arms and I said, "Watch, we'll just make it go away." And I started rubbing very lightly back and forth across the bump. 30 seconds, she stops crying. I said, "Watch, we're going to make it go away." And I literally watched that red welt shrink until it disappeared to nothing. Pain was gone, no bruise, no problem. Boom. Okay, so there are some contraindications to these techniques I just said. I mean, if you just got bitten by a poisonous snake or a black widow spider or something like that, you do not want to rub the area because you do not want to move that toxin into your lymph system and spread it through the body. In these cases, the sequestering action of the immune system needs to be left in place until you can neutralize the venom or the poison that the body's been done. And of course you can't like massage a compound fracture. There are things you can do with those. I mean, and sometimes when the tissue is really, really seriously damaged, you really can't use some of these techniques because you can't even touch it. Now there are other techniques that you can use that I teach in the Fundamentals of Natural Healing course, but these particular techniques don't work well in those circumstances. Now, there are 3 more pain relief techniques here. One is deep breathing, the other is stretching, and the third one is gentle bouncing or lymphosizing. Now, I've already emphasized that deep breathing basically pumps the thoracic duct. So deep breathing greatly increases lymphatic flow through the body, and it also oxygenates the tissues. So deep breathing is actually one of the techniques that is very useful for chronic pain, but it is also useful for acute pain. It's a good idea to practice learning how to breathe deeply. Most people in our society are shallow breathers, and shallow breathing means you're missing one of the most critical elements to health, and that's oxygen. You're not getting enough oxygen into your body. And if you're not getting enough oxygen in your body, you're not going to be healthy. And I don't care what supplements you take, and I don't care what else you do. If you don't get enough oxygen in your body, you're not going to be healthy. So you basically lie down, make sure you breathe from your diaphragm. And if you can't breathe from your diaphragm, you probably have a hiatal hernia. And I've got a video on YouTube. Just go on YouTube and search hiatal hernia and it'll come up that shows you how to work on that. But basically practice breathing in 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, in 2, 3, 4, out, and lengthen that, in 2, 3, 4, 5, out 2, 3, 4, 5. I know some people who can breathe in for the count of 30 and out for the count of 30. I have done a little over 20 with practice. Took a while to get there, but that's deep breathing, and very few people can breathe that deeply. But I have, in classes that I used to teach, had people lie on the floor, taken them through a deep breathing exercise for 15 minutes, and then they get up off the thing and they said, I had a headache, it's gone. Oh, my elbow that was hurting, it doesn't hurt anymore. I mean, I have a number of times been like really hurting, like my neck or something else has been really hurting. I lie on the floor, just deep breathe for 15, 20 minutes, and I get up and the pain is gone. Okay? Simple, cheap, doesn't cost you anything. Stretching is also part of this. Stretching also helps to move lymph. It also helps to balance your muscles, and it's very important if you're doing anything repetitive, like straining in front of a computer, working on a keyboard. Stretch your muscles periodically in the opposite direction to which you're normally going, like you're leaning forward, stretch backwards. Okay, and this actually helps to balance the muscles and relieve the pain. Now, I learned a lot about this from a certified athletic therapist named Deanna Hansen, who basically talked about how posture and structural alignment is real important to health and to avoiding pain. And so what she's showing here is that most people stand on one leg, and that compresses the one leg and lengthens the other leg, throws their pelvis out of alignment, basically puts a curve in their back, and everywhere in that is straining the body against the flow of gravity, which causes muscle tension, which ultimately results in pain, lower back pain, neck pain, and so forth. So what she taught me to do is you catch yourself standing on one leg, switch and do the opposite. Stand on the other leg for a minute and then stand on both legs and balance it. And as I've done some of this stuff, you can't believe it. This will help keep your pelvis in alignment and help reduce back pain. I've done this with a lot of people who have chronic back pain. A lot of us walk kind of leaning forward, or we're constantly straining our head forward, and then see all those muscles at the back of the neck are having to hold the weight of the head up against gravity. Well, they get tired, and that damages them. They start to hurt. So if you can learn to like sit up straighter and so forth, then that will actually help to alleviate that. But you can also stretch those muscles back the opposite direction, get them to relax, and that'll take the pain away. I ran into this thing at Costco called the Miracle Ball Method, which is a really fun little thing. You can Google Miracle Ball Method, and you can find the lady who sells these and the little book she has about it. You take these little soft plastic rubber balls, they're about 5 inches in diameter, and so let's say you've got a pain in your neck, which I sometimes get from working on the computer. I lay on the floor, I stick the little plastic ball right behind my neck, and I basically just let that lie on it so that it's stretching me in the opposite direction to which I'm normally stretching, and I sit there and just deep breathe and relax. And after 5 or 10 minutes, the neck pain has gone away, and I'm fine. You can do that. She's got little things for doing that, laying on the balls for back pain, lower back pain, pelvic pain, pain in different parts of the body. But again, it's deep breathing, and you're just stretching the body in the opposite way to which it's been stretched to create damage, so that you're doing this. Now, the other technique here is called lymphasizing by Dr. West, which is bouncing up and down gently on a mini trampoline. This is just basically you do not have your feet leave the mat. This is just gently vibrating your body up and down, which dramatically increases lymph and pumps lymph and basically helps tone your muscles and relieve chronic pain without causing any damage. So this is a kind of exercise that Dr. West taught that can be done by practically anyone who, even if you're older or achy or whatever, because it doesn't put any real stress on your body or damage tissues. Now, I'm going to spend the remainder of the time kind of explaining how some of this applies to chronic pain. Chronic pain is basically the result of long-term tissue damage, which is also a sign of chronic inflammation. And basically, this is setting up the pattern for disease. I was just reading in a book, the Australian naturopath Dorothy Hall. She says you have to make sure that, like, you treat a bruise or an injury properly, because if you don't, that can become a site at which a cancer can develop later. And one of Matthew Wood's teachers, Tismal Crow, basically said the same thing. And a lot of natural healers will say that if you don't properly treat the injury, the small problem, that's where the big problem grows from. That's why it's so important to understand this, is because if you learn to treat small injuries and small diseases properly, they never become big injuries and big diseases. So anyway, these techniques will work with chronic pain and just take longer. So what Dr. West explained is, okay, if you basically take a balloon and you blow it up over and over and over and over again, it will gradually lose some of its elasticity. So it blows up easier and easier and easier. Well, your tissue is the same way. Your tissue gets stretched, and the connective tissue gets stretched and everything by this inflammatory process and this collection of fluid in the tissue spaces, and it loses structural tone. It becomes weakened. And when it's been repeatedly subject to that inflammation and swelling and becomes repeatedly weakened, it basically is easily irritated again. In other words, it can really rapidly get swollen up with fluid again. Now, he said, so what happens is people will rub the place where they've got the pain. The pain will go away because they pump all the fluid out of that. And then later, the pain comes back and they rub it again and so forth. But what they're doing is they're waiting until the thing fills up with fluid again to rub it. So he said the secret is to rub it often enough that you don't ever let the fluid build up in there again. And if you don't let the fluid build up in there again and you do it consistently enough, then what will happen is you're holding the tissues in the proper homeostatic condition, that negative subatmospheric pressure condition, long enough that they can start to knit back together and rebuild and create better structural tone, so that they'll start holding and resisting the tendency to get swollen and inflamed again. So at the time that I started working with Dr. West, several years earlier, I had injured my knee in a moped accident. Actually, I had injured my knee in a moped accident in, let's see, it would have been 1987. Yeah, it was 1987. So I'm sorry, 1977. And I met Dr. West in 1982. So it had been 5 years. And what happened is that I had been in an accident on a moped, and I broke my wrist. And I also told the doctors that my knee hurt, but I was in a military installation, and they felt my knee, and they said my knee was okay, and they didn't x-ray it. And 3 times I had a different doctor, feel my knee because I was complaining it hurt, and they said, it's fine, and they didn't x-ray it. Well, it turns out that 2 weeks later, when I tried to walk around on it for a little bit, it swelled up like a balloon, got huge water on the knee, which basically water on the knee is lymph on the knee. So it's basically this process I'm talking about of lymph leaking in tissue spaces. Went to the hospital. The doctor trained a medic how to aspirate knees using me as the guinea pig, but they drew out 100 cc's of blood red fluid. And they went and x-rayed my knee then and found out my kneecap had broken in 3 pieces. The doctor then matter-of-factly tells me that if they had caught this on the night of the accident, there'd be a 50-50 chance my knee would have healed normally. But now that I've walked around on it with it being broken and broken blood vessels and scraped up the cartilage on the underside of the kneecap, the chances are better than 90% that my knee will never be normal again. It will develop arthritis. I will probably have to have surgery on it at some later date, blah, 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 blah. pronounced this wonderful little voodoo hex on me, and for 5 years it seemed to be true. I couldn't run anymore. I walked with a slight limp. And I remember one time I was just in a movie theater and I just barely banged my leg a little bit into the seat in front of me, and it hurt so bad I collapsed on the floor in pain. I mean, in the aisle, because it was excruciating. And that was my knee. I mean, basically I had arthritis in my knee. Arthritis, inflammation of the joint, chronic inflammation of that joint. Okay, so then I learned about Dr. West. And I basically started every day, 2 or 3 times a day, bouncing up and down gently on the mini trampoline, and at least 10 times a day, as often as I could think about it, I would sit there and massage my knee until I could feel all the fluid around my kneecap and in my knee, and until the pain went, keep the pain went away, and then I'd keep rubbing it and keep the pain away. And 30 days later, I was running again with no pain in my knee. And that was in 1982. That was nearly, 30 years ago. And I do occasionally get a little ache in my knee, but I work on it a little bit more. And I basically have been able to hike, run, do all sorts of things on this knee that was supposedly having these problems. Now, someone just asked a question, so I'm saying that chronic arthritis is reversible through massage. No, I'm saying that, first of all, I had to have the nutrients in my diet, so I could take, here's the thing. People can take the glucosamine or the chondroitin or the minerals or the other nutrients, the silica, the different things, the vitamins that are needed for these things. But here's the problem. If that tissue is in that chronically swollen state, those nutrients and the oxygen needed for healing and the drainage of waste needed for healing is not taking place efficiently. So by doing the massage and coupled with all the other good health practices, that allows the nutrition to get in there, which gives the tissue a chance to heal. Whereas otherwise, it doesn't really ever get to where it needs to go. And so that's also why I'm a big believer in actually applying remedies topically as well as taking them internally, putting them right where the tissue needs them. So essentially, this is an example of how you use this for chronic pain. Deanna also, the lady that showed me about the posture, actually did an hour-long massage on people's abdomen. And typically they would lose 5 to 10 pounds in 1 to 3 inches, which shows that most of what was going on in their abdomen basically was fluid retention, inflammation. I honestly think that a lot of our weight in modern society is there's so many irritating things in our diet. They're constantly inflaming our intestines and basically creating this fluid retention, which lowers our metabolism and lowers our energy production in those cells, and then makes us tend towards weight accumulation and so forth. So that was an interesting thing she did. And she also did, this is how she did the abdominal massage. You would use 3 fingers and just rub and just massage in there. And I've done this on myself and eased pain in my abdomen. By the way, this will also sometimes help bring up a lot of emotional wounds that you have that need to be healed. And she also would do the same thing on the face, 1 hour massage on the face and the neck. And it was like getting a facelift. I mean, I know when she did it to me, I looked 10 years younger. I went and looked in the mirror and I go, whoa, okay? Showing again the vital importance of this lymphatic drainage to your health. And yet this is something that's free, it's cheap, it takes a little time sometimes, and yet it's one of the big secrets to healing that is just not being taught out there. And this is just some of the applications of it. So I'm going to tell about the Fundamentals of Healing class, and then I'm going to answer some questions that people have asked to me. But the Fundamentals of Healing class, the first one actually that we're going today is this basic pain and injury. Then the rest of them, if you decide to take the class, the first 3 ones are about relieving pain. We talk about herbal remedies for pain, including counteracting plant and animal poisons and remedies that you apply to actually help the tissues heal, to help tone those tissues back up again. And then we talk about using energy techniques, which don't require you to touch the body to heal pain and promote to relieve pain and promote healing. And that's what you use on the serious stuff that you can't touch the person. And then the next 3 sessions are about understanding acute illness. See, because the same process is going on when you have a cold or a flu or a fever or whatever. It's just a biochemical irritation taking place, not a mechanical irritation. So there are very similar concepts being used here that help that. And then we do three sections basically on the ABCs: relieving the stress, getting the nutrients the body needs into the body, and detoxifying the body. And then, of course, a summary thing to put that all together. If you're interested in registering for this class, it's $127. Each session will be at least an hour and a half. The one I did last night was longer. And that, not counting the class you just took, that's 15 hours of instruction for $127. That's like going to a 2-day workshop, 2-day class with no travel expenses for just $127. You can register at www.treelight.com or call our toll-free number 800-416-2887. And the original class I wrote on this is called Dr. Mom, Dr. Dad. I'm recording these webinars because I'm updating Dr. Mom, Dr. Dad to become the Fundamentals of Natural Healing course. And if you buy the Dr. Mom, Dr. Dad course for $247, you can get the webinar for free. So now I'm going to answer some of the questions that people have asked. And one of the questions I noticed was, what direction do you rub? You rub in any direction you want, because it does not, I mean, just like the light fast stroke moving back and forth rapidly moves lymph, whatever feels good, do it, because it doesn't matter how you compress the tissues. The lymph will always move in one direction because of little one-way check valves in it. I did not put the handouts for this class anywhere because this is actually a free preview of the class. The handouts are actually with the people who are paying for the class. The one says, this hiking story is amazing because as a nurse I learned don't remove the shoes or boots when swelling because you might not be able to get them back on. And that's what they taught me in Boy Scouts. But what I'm saying is that you take down the swelling with the massage and you go right back on. Someone asked about the pressure techniques with the lady who was shot. Okay, I can tell you, obviously, in the third session, I get into some stories of using the energy for healing that are pretty dang near miraculous. If you can hold the swelling down, if you can hold the irritation down, you have a much better chance of recovery from that injury. And there are lots of things you can do to keep that from, help those tissues. But, if the damage is severe enough, you're going to die. And I mean, death is an inevitable presentation, so part of living. So nothing is going to stop us from dying. Will St. John's wort affect any inflammation in the body? St. John's wort has anti-inflammatory actions. A lot of herbs have anti-inflammatory actions. I don't know if St. John's wort would work for ligaments elsewhere in the body. I just happen to know it worked well on the shoulder, partly because part of the shoulder was this feeling of feeling burdened. And St. John's wort, one of its properties is actually to help ease that, feeling of feeling overwhelmed and burdened. Does avoidance of foods such as wheat and fungus source food make a difference? Yeah, basically, everybody's a little different. And what may irritate my body may not irritate your body. So some people have wheat allergies. Some people have dairy allergies. People are sensitive to different foods. That's why you can't just read a book and know how to get well. You have to start paying attention to the pleasure and pain signals that your body is giving you so that you understand that certain things that you may be eating every day are basically contain neurotoxins or other irritants that are basically causing inflammation in your system. And I don't care how many supplements you take or drugs or anything that you do, if you don't stop ingesting those substances that you're allergic to or that are causing irritation to your system, you're just going to keep causing more tissue damage and more inflammation. And whatever you do is just like putting the finger in the dike and trying to keep the dam from busting. It'll eventually just stop working. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people think that natural remedies don't work, is because they expect natural remedies to somehow miraculously heal the smashed finger when they're still hitting it with the hammer. And people expect the same thing with drugs. They expect the drugs to miraculously heal the smashed finger when it's still being hit with the hammer. You have to identify the hammer, and that's really where the trickiest part of natural healing comes from, is really looking at what to do. If you have already taken the Dr. Mom, Dr. Dad class, I tried to email a coupon code to everyone for a substantial discount on this program who had taken the course. If you didn't get it, I don't remember the discount, but there's a substantial discount we gave for people. Just call the office and they'll give you that discount. I think it's like, I don't want to say because I don't remember, but if you've already taken the Dr. Mom, Dr. Dad class, you can take the webinar really cheap. How can nasal polyps be cured without surgery? Well, again, here you've got a situation where a nasal polyp is actually a pus-filled thing where there's infection, a long-term inflammatory thing, and again, the question is, what's causing it? All right. One of the things that can help to shrink them is snuffing a mixture of bayberry root bark powder and golden seal powder, which I've seen some good results with that. But ultimately, if you can't figure out why the sinuses are getting so irritated, which often happens because of food allergies or stuff going on in the gut, then they'll tend to like grow back. When doing the tummy massage, do you massage or hold the fingers in place for a while? Actually, the truth is you do whatever feels right. You just get started rubbing, and there's no like magic to the whole thing. In fact, as you start rubbing tissue, you'll start to feel the fluid. And when I started doing this, one of the things that was interesting is I actually started to learn how to diagnose by palpitation. Because as you start feeling tissue, you start understanding what healthy tissue feels like. And this is actually how doctors used to diagnose, do a lot of diagnosis is through palpitation. And then you can tell when tissue is too hot or tissue is too cold or when it's too swollen or when it's too hard. And you can actually feel the tissue. And so it's not like you have to follow some like set technique. Just rub and do what feels good. Someone says, I already have the Dr. Mom, Dr. Dad to book and pass the test. Again, we did send out a coupon for upgrading that book for, I think, a fairly substantial discount. We are going to be doing a new version of the book. It's the major difference is the new version of the book is not going to talk about specific products. It's more generic in nature, and we're going to have supplemental product guides. And we're doing this so that we can sell the course to anyone, not just people who sell a particular product line. That's why we're updating the course. Meaning, do you apply pressure and hold or move the hands around? You can do both. You can you can move the hands around, and if you encounter an area that's particularly sensitive or tender, you can kind of just hold it for a minute, put a little pressure on it, and kind of maybe even just kind of gently rub it. And that pumps the fluid out of those tissues, and when the fluid leaves the tissues, the pain goes away. It's really miraculous. The trick, of course, is doing the things that actually keep that tissue healing so that the pain will stay away. There's not a discount if you already took the ABC plus D class. I'm going to be updating that in a couple of months too, and there will be a discount for that, but this is a completely different class. If you had a severely sprained ankle and didn't know about this when you sprained it, what can you do to speed the healing? Well, you still can do the massaging, only in this case you're going to have to do the very light stroking because it's going to hurt too much to do it otherwise. And then in the second class, I actually talk about doing soaks, which is basically you get some tissue healing herbs, some astringents, and some nice mucilaginous herbs. You make a big pot of tea, basically, or a decoction, and you soak the foot in it, and that'll take the swelling down and ease the pain. I've done that with someone who wouldn't let me do the massage on their ankle, and it worked as well. That's part of what we talk about in the next class. And these techniques, by the way, I'm going to tell you right now, the techniques I teach in this thing actually help anything, okay? So, because again, if you get the idea that any tissue that basically, is swollen, red, irritated, or whatever, that's inflamed, these techniques can be helpful for it. It's just which techniques are the best ones to apply. And the best thing to do is just to experiment with some of these techniques. I don't have time because I actually, out of time, I need to end this webinar to answer some of the people who are asking me specific questions about specific illnesses and so on and so forth. And because again, to really answer those questions effectively, I really have to talk to the person who has them, because I have to understand what's going on in their body. I have to understand the stresses they're under. I have to understand what kind of diet they are on. I mean, yes, again, I can give you techniques that reduce pain, swelling, and inflammation and have tissue healing, but that doesn't do any good unless you go back and you look at how is the person's life out of balance. What emotional stresses are they under? What mental stresses are they under that they're not dealing with? I've had people that the solution to their health problems was to get out of a bad marriage. I've had people that the solution to their health problems was to quit their job and get a job that wasn't so stressful for them. And their health problems cleared up with that. I've had people that it was changing their diet that did it. I've had people that it was doing a cleanse that did it. And those people could have exactly the same disease symptom, okay? The same tissues irritated, inflamed, or damaged, but the cure was different because the cure was whatever removed the irritation that was causing that. And it's not the same from one person to the other, which is why it's why the whole historical uses approach of just simply saying, okay, use this for this disease, whatever, sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, is because it's basically based on treating the effect, the end result of the damage to the tissues, without ever stopping and backing up and asking, where is it coming from? Where's the cause? Where's the source? Where is the irritation to the system arising from? If you want to be a natural healer, you have to start asking that question. And you have to start looking in and not being afraid to start really interviewing, talking to a person, asking them about the stress they're under, asking them. And I'm going to close with a simple thing I just read in an article the other day, which was this guy was basically says his mom came from the old country and she was like into this kind of natural medicine thing. So whenever he wasn't feeling well, she asked him 3 questions. First question was, what did you eat? Okay, that's the nutrition. What did you eat? What did you eat that made you sick or that irritated your body? That's one of the first questions I ask myself when I'm not feeling well. What have I been eating? Okay, what's my diet been like? Second question, how are your bowels moving? In other words, how's your system cleaning out? Are your sweat glands functioning? Are you drinking enough water and to flush the toxins out of your system? Are your bowels moving regularly so that you're eliminating the waste from your colon? Is your eliminative system working to get the waste out of the body? And the third one was, are you getting enough sleep? Now my thing of that is, what kind of stress are you under? Because I don't care what I feed you or how I get your body detox. If you're under stress and you've got stressful things going on in your life, you may not get well, because those stressful things are what is the cause. And I've had people, who, hey, I eat really well, I exercise, I do all this stuff, and the solution to their problems is we help them solve some of the stresses going on in their life. And that removed the cause, and then the effect ceased. So we've come to the end of my time, and I wish I had more time to answer some more of your questions, but I am recording both of the webinars I am doing tonight, and I will be posting one of them, whichever one I like better, treelight.com, so that you can review this information. And keep in mind that this is a sample of what I teach in this class. Someone just asked, do the members get a discount? Yes, they do. They get $30 off the webinar. So the webinar for them is $97 instead of $127. Okay. All right. Thanks again. Appreciate you listening, and we'll